Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to yet another episode of Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. I'm your host, as always, Dean Simon. And before we get into everything, please make sure to like and leave a comment. Also, subscribe. We are very close to the 900 subscriber threshold, which I can't believe we've reached that mark so fast. Still on the road to 1,000 subscribers, though. So if you could hit that big red button below, I would really appreciate it. Also, turn on post notifications so you don't miss any future episodes of Bucks Latest. All right. So, first on the docket, we're going to talk about a Jeff Teague comment because, of course, he's built up quite a reputation in his post playing days for having some pretty interesting takes on his podcast called Club 520. And, for his sake, the podcast itself has become one of the more prominent in the NBA or basketball space. So, congratulations to Jeff Teague on that front. But recently, he spoke on the Bucks re-signing Thanasis Antetokounmpo to that 1 year, $2.9 million guaranteed deal, a deal which is going to probably push out one of the guys that's remaining on the end of the bench for the Bucks 17-man roster as things currently stand. But anyways, Jeff Teague, he made a comment about Thanasis, being able to earn that position himself, even though he does have the connection, the advantage of being Giannis Antetokounmpo's brother, that he does deserve the contract and that he deserves a space in the NBA, but that it's very, very much connected to Giannis, which is one of the more obvious things that you can say with regard to the Milwaukee Bucks in the past couple of weeks. But he said, and I quote, "He can hoop, though. I ain't going to never say he can't hoop, though. Like, he deserves it. I mean, he could play in the NBA. Obviously, you see his highlights, but you wouldn't think that. For sure, part owner." So part owner in reference to Giannis kind of being able to do whatever he wants in this instance, and one of these things is to make sure that the roster always has a spot open for his brother Thanasis. And it's not really it's old news at this point to say that that Thanasis is in the NBA because of Giannis, but I really think Thanasis does deserve a little bit more credit for his individual talent, and regardless of who his brother is, because I feel like if anything, Thanasis could potentially work his way onto an NBA team, or at least he would have an opportunity to if he wasn't Giannis's brother, strictly due to his defense. I feel like because of his frame and his athleticism, he could possibly make his way onto an NBA team because of his defensive intensity and just the kind of hype and fire that he brings to the game. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's cheering on his brother from the sidelines most of the time when he's in a Bucks jersey. But I feel like he could be a good locker room presence for just about any team. He just has very infectious personality, and that doesn't really have to do with being Giannis's brother. His defense, his intangibles on that end of the floor, mixed with the fact that he could be a good locker room presence, I feel like that's enough to justify that Thanasis could maybe like make his way onto an NBA team that's not the Bucks in and let's say if he ever were to get on a team that doesn't have Giannis Antetokounmpo on it, I think it's possible, probably not likely, but there's a chance that he could maybe sneak onto a roster due to those qualities alone. Moving forward, one of the guys that Thanasis may eventually push out is Chris Livingston, and I feel like I've been seeing this kind of mounting for the last couple of days or weeks, that a lot of people in NBA media or NBA writers, talking heads, really don't like the Chris Livingston re-signing after, of course, he had that incredibly impressive summer league stretch. But it seems as though a lot of people in Bucks fandom don't really approve of the Bucks' decision to bring him back, even though he had a great 6 game stretch. And that kind of baffles me a little bit, but I feel like one of the leading voices in this is fan It's John Spiza, who came out with an article recently detailing why he believes the Bucks kind of shot themselves in the foot. Those are his words, with the Chris Livingston re-signing. And you could look at it from the viewpoint of they shot themselves in the foot because now they brought back another guy in Chris Livingston who just increases the size of the roster, and they're going to have to continue to make really tough decisions with regard to who they're going to cut and who's going to stick around and play at the G League level and things like that. So adding another person might just make things harder. But after the summer league run that he had, you can't really be mad at him coming back to the team in general. But of course, this is just kind of talking about his overall place within the team. Like, is he going to get any minutes? Is he really going to be able to contribute anything to this roster that's looking to win right now? But John Spiza came out with an article that it feels like he's being not too critical of Chris Livingston. He actually points out that when he did play for the Wisconsin Herd in the G League, he averaged 18.1 points and 8.1 rebounds per game. But he kind of alluded to the fact that Chris Livingston, he wouldn't be the first guy in Bucks history that had a good run in the G League or a good run in Summer League and then went on to have a stinker in the regular season or just not really get that kind of opportunity at all in the regular season. He said that the Bucks, though, have seen the Summer League story before, and investing in it has not yielded results. With 42 games and about 200 minutes under his belt, Livingston hasn't cracked the rotation in 2 seasons with the team. That's unlikely to happen in 2025-26. In a win-now environment like Milwaukee, Livingston offers a lot less than someone like Coffee, like Amir Coffee, a plug-and-play wing who has proven himself a capable rotation piece. So the one reason why I wouldn't go as far as to say that the decision to bring back Chris Livingston was a terrible one and that the Bucks really they went backwards with this idea is because we haven't, and this could go into John Spee's point, but we haven't seen Chris Livingston take the floor for the Bucks in 2025-26. I feel like we can't come to a rational judgment of how he performs for this team if we are still a little while away from training camp in early September. So maybe this is just me being extra hopeful that Chris Livingston can eventually carve out a spot in the rotation for himself. But I feel like we can't just throw away the potential that he could contribute to the team at a high level this year. Because the aggression that he showed in the summer league, I really do feel like it has potential to transfer over into NBA games, especially let's say if you give him an opportunity in February or March when things are starting to kind of wind down. It's like the last you're like 3 quarters of the way through the season, and teams are more or less like phoning it in through games 55 to 65. That could be his prime opportunity to shine because if the Bucks really want to go deep into their rotation and give guys chances who typically wouldn't play in that moment, Chris Livingston could get that opportunity, get his chance to shine, and really prove that his skill set could be conducive to winning, or at least he can help the Bucks get to a point where they're putting more wins than losses in the column when he's touching the floor. So I'm not really in the school of thought of thinking that the Chris Livingston re-signing was a mistake. I feel like if anything, it's good to have a guy like him coming in off the bench potentially to make things a little bit easier for the Bucks wings because you know that you have guys like Chris Livingston and Tyler Smith to at least get some kind of experience under their belt if the guys ahead of them aren't really picking up the slack. Anyways, speaking of guys that would be ahead of Chris Livingston in this hypothetical situation, the Brooklyn Nets were able to re-sign Cam Thomas on the 1 year, $6 million qualifying offer, which will, I think this is kind of interesting in general with him because I believe he'll have a no trade clause going into this next year. He'll have the full 25-26 season with a no trade clause, and then in in 2026, in the summer of 2026, he will be an unrestricted free agent and he'll have the opportunity to earn a salary north of 25 or 26 million dollars a year, which is pretty crazy for a guy like Cam Thomas, but it's really not that crazy to think because he was a guy that when this goes into a whole nother conversation about whether or not guys that are on a terrible team but put up huge scoring numbers should be celebrated or not. We saw the same kind of thing in the latter years of Bradley Beal's tenure with the Washington Wizards when he was putting up 30 points plus a game and he actually missed an all-star team or an all-star game selection when he was doing so. I feel like people didn't really celebrate Bradley Beal for putting up the kind of numbers he did with the roster construction of the Wizards in mind. And I feel like Cam Thomas, and this past year for the Brooklyn Nets, he kind of got a lot of the same treatment because people's immediate thought when it comes to guys like Cam Thomas who are balling out for a terrible team and putting up numbers, the first thought is that, yeah, of course he's going to average these kinds of numbers because he's the only one taking shots. He's the only one that the defense has to worry about. But with that last point, the fact that he's the only one that the defense has to worry about, that by default makes things so much more difficult for Cam Thomas, and it makes it more difficult for him to find open shots and really get himself good opportunities to put the ball in the basket. So, in that way, I really focus on that last point because, if anything, it should make it 10 times more difficult if you have no other capable scoring options on your team, if you're the one putting up 24 points a game, I believe, like Cam Thomas did this last year, and there are no other good scorers on your team, that's just an even more impressive feat. But, anyways, that was a little side tangent. Cam Thomas could be a potential target in a trade for the Milwaukee Bucks. And this was an idea that came from Fansided Jack Simone, who he wrote an article shortly after Cam Thomas went back to the Nets, and he proposed the idea that Cam Thomas could really assist Giannis with being able to contribute to winning, and because of his scoring prowess and his one-on-one shot creation, that he could kind of fill a role similar to like a Chris Middleton, just from a scoring and offensive perspective, as kind of that next guy up that you give him the ball in, let's say, big time situations in the end of a game. He's someone you can trust with putting the ball in the basket flat out. And Jack Simone said, and I quote, that's where Thomas could come into play, though he hasn't been able to contribute to winning yet up to this point in his career. Playing with Antetokounmpo would certainly help with that. And then he continues to say, the 23-year-old guard is constantly pressured, yet still manages to put up solid scoring numbers. And with a guy like Antetokounmpo next to him, perhaps his efficiency could take a leap as well. Having a guy as comfortable as Thomas is with the ball in his hands would be ideal for the Bucks, and whether they trade for him this season or try to sign him next summer as an unrestricted free agent, he should be toward the top of their target list. Now, the main problems with this, of course, is that I believe that Jack Simone did not take into account that I believe that Cam Thomas will have a no trade clause going into this year. So it's pretty likely that he won't waive that no trade clause to go to any prospective team, because he wants this year with the Nets to be as successful as possible. He doesn't want any hitches that could lead to him maybe not netting as much of a salary or of a long-term contract as he could get in next summer's free agency. So he'll probably want to stay with the Nets and just have a year to himself where he knows that his situation is set in stone, at least that he'll be playing basketball for the Brooklyn Nets. There's going to be no outside forces that are stopping him, and he'll just be able to put the ball in the basket and hope that a team out there is willing to take him on for a super long term and hefty deal. So it's unlikely, to me at least, that he would be traded this season coming towards the trade deadline. But in the summer of 2026, it may also not be looking too great for Milwaukee, because you got to keep in mind that this is going to be the first summer where we really see the ramifications of the Damian Lillard wave stretch, the $22.5 million that are immediately coming off the books and going into Damian Lillard's bank account. That's, of course, going to hurt the Bucks' chances of signing anybody, and not just Cam Thomas, who will be looking to, again, make a salary around 20 to 25, maybe even up to $30 million with the cap going up and up every single year. A guy like Cam Thomas could be extremely expensive, and I feel like the Bucks just won't have the kind of assets, or the kind of money freed up, I should say, to bring in a guy of his caliber, or at least a guy that's probably going to be demanding a salary like $25 million annually. It doesn't seem like it's in the cards. Of course, in theory, from a basketball standpoint, Cam Thomas could be an excellent fit next to Giannis Antetokounmpo as a guy that can really help with taking the pressure off of him on offense. And sure, he's not the greatest defender in the world, but um, the things that he can do with the ball in his hands as or potentially with the ball in his hands as a secondary scoring option to a guy like Giannis, it's his skill set is not just unique, because I think the thing that sets him apart most from others is his ability to get into his off the dribble jump shot, and the fact that he gets so high on his release. It's really really unique, and I feel like those kinds of things could really assist Giannis with potentially making a deep playoff run, but it might not be until next summer where we really, really think about these kinds of possibilities. And, anyways, wanted to close this off with a little bit of positivity coming from that of former NBA champion multiple times over, I believe two-time NBA champion, don't quote me on that, Patty Mills, who basically likened Giannis to Tim Duncan and other Spurs greats recently in this was from an article that came out from basketballnetwork.net's Jonas Pinerio. Hope I'm not butchering that name. But Patty Mills said, and I quote, about Giannis, when you have a franchise player like that who puts the team first, is accountable in all those little details, it reminds me of Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili and players like that who are able to trickle down and rub off on other players in the locker room and anyone new that comes in. So I really love hearing that kind of thing from a guy like Patty Mills, who was part of those beautiful game San Antonio Spurs rosters where everybody on the roster was taken into account and everybody had a specific role to play. But the main thing was just making sure your teammates are set up better than you are and constantly moving the ball and finding, turning down good looks for great looks and all kinds of team basketball related stuff. For a guy like Patty Mills, who was so enveloped in that kind of system, to be saying such positive things about Giannis, and that it reminds Patty Mills of guys like Tim Duncan and Manu, who have gone down as probably some of the best teammates to a bunch of NBA players that have ever existed. It's a really, really positive sign, and it's just a really cool way to kind of get the, not necessarily the inside scoop, because Patty Mills isn't really on the inside with the Bucks, but it's cool to see from another player's perspective who played for such a prestigious franchise and alongside one of the greatest players to ever play the game. It's cool to see that Giannis shares a lot of those qualities with Tim Duncan, and just in terms of him being a great teammate. And those are things that you could have expected to hear from a guy like Patty Mills, but it's just always great hearing them regardless. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for tuning into another episode of Milwaukee. I'm getting ahead of myself. Of Bucks latest, presented by FanArch. Again, I have been Dean Simon, like always. And before you go, make sure to leave a like, leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think about today's episode, and also subscribe. We are again very, very close to reaching that 1,000 subscriber threshold, so I would really appreciate it if you could do so, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future episodes. All right, I will see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.